Hey everyone, welcome to Beyond. Be sure to hit like and subscribe so the algorithm can find the show. Today we're joined by a very special guest, Joe Heanue. He's the CEO of Triple Rings Technologies, which is a premier contract design and manufacturing firm out of the Bay Area. And Joe, I was reading where you attended MIT and you went to Cal Berkeley to get a Ph.D. And just if you would take the audience back to where it all got started for you, it really seems like you have a really strong focus in the science area. But when you started going to college, where did this whole journey begin for you?
Yeah, I think I have always been interested in engineering and science. Probably I'm one of the rare people who knew what he wanted to do pretty early. I think in 7th grade, I thought I wanted to go be an engineer. Ended up at MIT. Took a slight diversion and studied physics because I liked the foundation science, and then came out to Berkeley to do engineering. I also got the focus on working in medical stuff pretty early. Towards the end of high school, did some community service work through my high school, and kind of prompted me to think about how I could channel what I do into something positive and impactful.
Yeah,
So
positive
I
for
think I,
humanity. And so
yeah,
where did you grow up? Was it in the Bay Area? Was it on the
no,
East Coast?
I grew up in Boston, and always thought I would come out to Berkeley, do my degree, and go back. But now I've been here 30 years and have never quite made it back. Married a woman from Cleveland along the way who has had her share of winters and never wants to experience them again. So I think I'm pretty firmly planted here in California.
Well, it's not a bad place to live for sure. And so, at an early stage, did you recognize that you had the smarts and the ability to get into an MIT? Was that something that dawned on you later in life, or did you know kind of early on that you had the skill sets?
Um, that's a good question. I think I always was pretty goal oriented and probably set my sights on MIT fairly early in high school. Applied to a couple of places. Briefly considered going someplace else, but one of the pieces of advice I got from my father was, well, if you're going to study engineering, why would you want to go someplace other than MIT? And he talked me into it. So,
Hey, no pressure though. I mean, that's
I
the
also
least
have,
smart school.
yeah, I also have the unique experience. I have a twin brother who also went to MIT. So,
Well, you guys, it all certainly clearly runs in the family. Well, that's pretty impressive accomplishment. But along the way, as you start on this journey of going to MIT and setting your sights on that, can you express any obstacles that you came across where you had to power through it, or did it all kind of come easy to you?
oh, certainly plenty of obstacles. MIT is the sort of place that will put obstacles in front of you if they aren't there, and just always push you to do more work, take more classes. I also, came from a background where we didn't have tremendous means, so I was always working and going to school at the same time. So definitely workload that needed to be powered through, and MIT is the kind of place that will get you to test your limits. If you are doing fine with 4 classes, then take 5. If you're doing fine with 5, take 6. And it's just that sort of grinding place.
Yeah, but certainly it creates character, it creates confidence, and certainly belief in your abilities. If you can do that, you can take it to the next level at other opportunities. So you've been at the helm of Triple Ring Technology since 2005, is what I read. Can you express to the audience what is the mission of Triple Ring Technology? What is it you do, and how do you provide value to I guess the medical device and biotech community?
Sure. I can kind of describe where Triple Ring is now, and then maybe circle back to how we started the place, which is an interesting obstacle to overcome story. But now, what I describe Triple Ring is we're a co-development company. So we partner with scientists, engineers, entrepreneurs to develop new products, start new companies, launch new programs. But we do it in close cooperation. So core to our approach to the business is we always want to have some skin in the game with our clients. We want to be um, part of the success of our projects and also take part of the risk of our projects. So we have a co-development model, as we call it, where we like to invest in what we work on and work on what we invest in. Um, the work we do is for science-driven companies. Right now, that is mainly life science companies and med tech companies, but we'll opportunistically tackle problems in other areas. And over time, we've done electric vehicle projects, satellite projects, aerospace work. But the heart and soul of the company are in the med tech and life science spaces.
So you now so that's certainly a unique model as I've come across because I've dealt with a lot of contract manufacturers and typically they'll quote on a project, here's the price, here's the project milestones, and you're off to the races. Whereas you guys really do come in on that co-development deal. Can you give a little more detail of what that looks like? I imagine that you come in at some amount of money on a convertible note. Can you give some structure or context what the co-development piece looks like?
Sure. For a very early stage company that's recently founded, often an entrepreneur will find themselves um, needing a modest amount of work done to prove out the concept and get them to a point where they can raise a more substantial amount of money. Um, we'll typically do an early stage project like that for half cash, half equity as a baseline model with some flexibility to go beyond that. Um, and then we're typically helping not just with the technical challenges, but also trying to help with framing the business model and putting the pitch in place to help raise companies, help raise money down the road.
Yeah, which is the
Um,
lifeblood of a company, right? Small startups.
yeah, no, if you're the CEO of a startup, your job is to raise money first and foremost, and everything else comes second. So we recognize that that's the biggest challenge our clients face, and we try to help them. Um, just recently, we put a partnership in place with a number of VC colleagues who made an investment in Triple Ring to help enable this co-development model. But they've also put together a really interesting organization called General Inception. Um, General Inception is probably most concisely described as a company that builds companies. So their idea is to work alongside scientific founders as an institutional co-founder, and they want to bring some capital to support these new companies, but they also want to bring commercial expertise and a track record of scaling um, and raising money. And so we're pretty happy to be partnered with them because it's a um, whole other level of resources that we can give to our clientele to help make them successful.
So, as you think about your business model as a co-development organization, what is the biggest challenge when you set this model up in the practical world? So, you have this model, you have co-investment, co-development. What's the biggest hurdle, obstacle, challenge you've come across?
I think the biggest hurdle in co-development or in even just R&D services is establishing and building trust with the clients. By definition, an R&D project involves a lot of unknowns. You don't know what you're going to run into. You don't know what problems you're going to face. And inevitably, you want to trust the people who are alongside you. And committing to work on one of these projects together is a leap of faith. Um, we try to establish trust by being pretty open and transparent with folks. We also think our model of having some skin in the game helps establish trust and tries to set us up uh, so that we're on the same side with our customers. But it's always a process, and it's any company at the formation stage, whether they're hiring people or collaborating with people, challenges that trust and team building problem.
Right. As I think about your model, it obviously is somewhat heavily weighted towards startups, early stage device companies. You have this co-development, you have general assumption, the potential of an investment group of people. And obviously that leads to, once you mature this technology through the early phase development to a commercial position, you let that go. How do you as a CEO deal with the churn potential? I mean, it'd be great to have in your basket maybe mid-sized companies that are always coming back for continual development work. So if you've got a large composition of startup companies, how do you think about the churn and managing that balance between maybe more mature companies and early stage companies?
Sure. We try to keep a balance of mid-size and large companies in parallel with our startup customers. And I'd say historically our work has been split 50-50. Um, uh, in some cases, we like it when our startups grow into the mid-sized companies and start generating revenue, and we have some cases of that. Um, the co-development model is actually, I think, equally applicable at both ends of the spectrum, because um, at its core, it's all about having some skin in the game, taking some risk alongside your customers. For a startup company, that may be taking some equity. For a larger established company, that might be tying compensation to schedule or program milestones, or co-investing on a project by project basis. In both ends of the spectrum, it's all about trying to form that partnership um, and make progress together.
Yeah, we know in a startup that overnight success is usually 7 to 10 years. So while you get early stage companies and we have all aggressive timelines, a 3 to 5 year plan, and it's going to be the unicorn in the future, the reality is it does take longer. So when you think about sort of the gestational period of a startup that's working with you, is it usually 3 to 4 to 5 years? I mean, what does that time frame usually look like?
Um, yeah, 3 to 5 years is not atypical. Sometimes it can be longer, occasionally shorter. The projects we work on all involve some element of hardware and physical reality. They're not pure software. And realistically, you never go to um, idea to product in under 18 to 24 months. So that sort of determines the minimum threshold. Um, uh, but inevitably, things don't go the way you want. It takes time to raise money, so it stretches out. And so I'd say um, typical will be 3 or 4 years with some of our clients. We do have examples of clients who have been with us much longer, where we actually work in a virtual company model, where we're more or less an extension of their technical team on an ongoing basis for um, project after project. A client called Vioptics, who's a great example of that. I think we've been working with them for 9+ years now. They're a great group. Um, uh, um, Very flexible way of working together. And when you look back over those 9 years, at times we've had 2 people working for them, and at times we've had 35 people working for them. And we just ramp the team up and down to meet the business needs of the client, and gives them a lot of flexibility. It's also great for our folks because um, one of the challenges if you're doing outsourced R&D, most companies do that on just a project by project basis, where you get some specs handed to you, you do some work, and you throw it back over the fence, and then you may never see that product again.
Mhm.
In our model, where we're partnering with people, it tends to be stickier, and we tend to stay with stuff as the companies grow. Gives our folks some great pride of ownership in what they develop. Um, it can be a humbling experience because we see stuff as it needs to go out into the field, and you inevitably discover the things that you didn't think about. Um, you discover the commercial challenges, the customer uptake challenges, and I think that's a really important part of the business because fundamentally we're not an R&D lab, we're a organization that's trying to build commercial value.
And that's huge. I had a chance to visit your facilities in the Bay Area, and you got a massive amount of square footage. And what was interesting in there is you have these co-development companies that are in there on their own accord, developing their projects, but have the ability to tap into the broader team and the expertise at Triple Ring. So I think that's a very fascinating model because I think in startups, if you as a CEO can say, listen, we're going to go develop the cash flow model, the business plan, and the business plan calls for us to go to facility, hire the VP of R&D, hire the quality engineers, go through that process and do it in-house versus a contract manufacturer like yourselves where you can go and plug and play. And what I loved about your model is as the project sort of expands and contracts depending on where you're at, the technical team at a given company can go tap into the resources that you guys offer. And what I've experienced is your team is exceptionally competent. I mean, very, very bright people. And in our projects we're looking at, you seem to have skill sets across a broad spectrum. If you go to some places, maybe they can do guide wires and they can do peripheral catheters, or maybe have expertise in hardware and diagnostics, and they sort of divide. But with you guys, I've noticed you really can cover the broad gambit based on the talent you have.
Yeah, that's having a broad team has been something we've aimed for since the formation of the company. The official story about what triple ring means is that we like to look at a Venn diagram. We have three circles overlapping, and we like to work at the intersection. Um, that that means that we always want to have people from different disciplines who are able to work together. So it creates a great environment in which to work. You're always around people you can learn from, collaborate with. It's great for our own team. As you mentioned, we also have about a dozen companies in the building here in California with us, maybe half a dozen in our facility in Boston. And for those startups, we're giving them access to infrastructure, equipment, things they need, but we're also letting them tap into that really stimulating environment where they can bump into people in the kitchen, have conversations, or at least they could before the shelter in place started.
Right.
It's a little harder to bump into each other on Zoom, but
Yeah.
we're trying our best.
Well, that's the ultimate social distancing. So now that you've mentioned that, let's segue a little bit. How has COVID-19 affected your business model, if at all?
Um, well, I think COVID has affected everyone's business significantly. For us, the first impact was just shifting people so that most of them were working offsite. We actually did that, started to encourage people to work offsite even before the shelter in place went into effect. So maybe got a jump start on the social distancing. And we've seen people adapt to having to work remotely across the broad spectrum of our team. Um, we've been different than some companies, though, in that we've had a core group that's been in the building consistently from the beginning, and that's because we do work in labs, and in particular wet labs directed at medical device development, diagnostics, and a couple cases we're working on COVID specific projects. We've kept that um, that core team working and taking advantage that we have 100,000 square feet here, so it's easy to spread out if you only have a dozen people in the building. Um, so we've been adapting. I think working remotely, in all honesty, is working better than I expected it to. I think that's a testament to our team. They're up to challenges. Um, in terms of the overall business climate, that was the next shift we started to see. And I think it's still sorting itself out. But what we've seen is the bigger companies have slowed down their decision making considerably. I think they have uh, um, maybe more inertia, and it's harder for them to figure out how to adapt. Um, the startups, though, we've seen going full speed ahead, and I think they realize that their most precious resource is time.
Yeah.
They need to make progress, and so they want to keep going. And we've seen some pretty determined, adaptable folks who have just buckled down. And we've even seen some of our clients successfully raise rounds of capital in the middle of this.
Well, that's exciting. I'm thinking as a startup, you live and die on the schedule and what you've accomplished, hitting those key milestones for the investors. And so I can appreciate that they're really intent upon, accomplishing those milestones, getting the results for the inevitable next round. So I remember going through there, and I can't remember the name of the company. I remember the logo was yellow, and I believe right now it's a cannabis device. It's to detect if you were high on pot. But it's a
Mhm.
very fascinating story. So if you could take us through that company from when you first met it and first engaged it to where it is today, to talk about the impact that Triple Rings made on the development of that device.
Sure. So that company is Hound Labs. I'm glad you remembered the yellow. They have a very distinctive yellow. Their logo really jumps out at you. And as you said, Hound Labs is developing a breathalyzer for cannabis to address the very important safety issue on the roads, and perhaps even more importantly in the workplace, where
Mm.
you want to make sure people who are um, handling heavy machinery and equipment are doing so in a safe manner. So it's an exciting project, an important project. We've been working with them for a number of years. Um, we started when they were quite early on. They weren't even called Hound Labs at the time. Um, and they had some technology licensed out of a university. They're interested in building a prototype. We started out helping them, and turned out to be a really good example of a project that runs into many unexpected hurdles. And I'll be quite honest, say the problem was a lot harder than any of us expected, and the um, original chemistry was only a piece of the puzzle, and there were many more problems to solve. Um, we ended up expanding what we were doing with them, taking on more of the science, even some of the um, clinical or field work of evaluating uh, subjects in the field, figuring out what the root requirements are for a cannabis breathalyzer. At the time we started, no one even knew how much THC appeared in breath. And we had to figure that out from first principles. And as is the case with these things, it turns out to be a heck of a lot less than we thought. And so the problem is a lot harder. They they're looking for picograms of material. So I always remind people that's a trillionth of a raisin that we're trying to detect, and out in a demanding field environment. So it was a challenging problem. Whereas we started out thinking it was an engineering effort, it turned out to be a lot of science, and we pulled the right expertise into the project and have helped them along the way. they've raised capital as they've gone um, uh, from some really top tier venture firms. Now have quite a nice valuation and a lot of momentum behind them. And it's the kind of success story we like to see with our clients. It's also one of these projects where we've uh, had some really fascinating experiences along the way, ranging from watching people drive on a test track while stoned and measuring what's in their breath
Right.
to uh, it's I can also say it's the only project where I've ever been interviewed by Rolling Stone magazine. And as a physicist engineer, never thought talking to a Rolling Stone was in the cards for me. So.
Right. That's very fascinating. Now, when you first started on that on this project, I understand that, or I thought I heard that the initial focus was always a breathalyzer for cannabis, or was it something else?
No, it was always a breathalyzer for cannabis. Um, Interestingly, though, we've found that once you can detect minute quantities of material in breath and you have a general purpose platform for that, there's a whole range of things you can do, from other drugs of abuse to other healthcare applications. So we think they have a really exciting platform and really a great technology.
And what a great partnership with Triple Ring to make all this happen with the expertise. Again, when I went by there, they had a nice big section of space that they occupied, and I was able to see their branding, their logos, really, really cool. And it's
Yeah,
so
we
exciting to see that happen.
Yeah, we painted a wall yellow for them. We host some of their folks in our building, so they're here all the time. It's very collaborative and relatively seamless. So,
So let me go back to the co-development. So if a CEO is thinking about, do I take it in-house or do I go to a contract manufacturer? What does it take to be considered for the co-development fund?
oh, uh, we look at most of the projects that come through here from a co-development perspective. Um, like any organization that's investing resources, we only have so much we can invest, so we can't take all of them on. Um, so we look for projects with a few key characteristics. Uh, we look for a project where we believe we can help, and we're good at a lot of things, but we're not good at everything. And if a project doesn't fit our skill set, or if there are better people to do the work, we'll send people elsewhere. So fit with our team is important. Um, a willingness to embrace the co-development and partnership model is the next thing we look for. We're not a VC fund. We're not just a source of capital. We're collaborators, and we're looking for people who um, have that collaborative mindset. And we understand that there are people who want to work perhaps more in isolation and go off and in stealth mode and develop something and then come out and reveal it to the world. If they want to do that, that's fine. We're much more open, so we want people who can try to work with us. Um, we look for people who have all the intangibles that lead to fundability down the road. There's a certain combination of I don't know, drive and humility that's needed to be a successful startup CEO, successful startup founder. And I don't know if we can really quantify it or articulate it, but we we try to assess that fundability and see if we can get a sense of success. And then as we take projects to our investor partners, we'll also be looking for a fit with their interests and where the timing's right for what they're looking to do.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I would imagine with all the startups you've come across, you guys have a, call it muscle memory or your own version of AI. You probably have a pretty good sense of what that recipe for success looks like. If you're working with a company, the management team, their vision, kind of their approach on the front end of engagement, I would imagine you guys are a pretty good judge of character.
Yeah, well, we've done 500 plus projects for 200 or 300 companies at this point. So we've seen a lot, and you do start to recognize patterns. Uh, we've made our share of mistakes, and so sometimes you see some of the same kind of mistakes in process, and hopefully we can step in and share our experience and save people from making the errors we have. But I think that pattern recognition is helpful. It's striking to me. I've had 3 other stints where I've been a VP of engineering or R&D at small companies, and before starting Triple Ring, and uh, it, it it's really surprising to me just how much more you learn when you're doing project after project, because you're staying current on tools and technology. You're seeing a variety of things. The different projects kind of reinforce each other. You learn things in an unexpected way. It, it's it's really a beneficial environment, and it's hard to get that kind of experience out in a product company. It's just, you inevitably get stuck in the product life cycle where
Mhm.
you're going from initial idea to development to launch to sustaining engineering, and once you're a number of years down the road, then you kind of have to reset and catch up with where the technology is as you start your next project. And here we're just seeing so many new things all the time that I think it's a benefit to the folks who work here, and it's a benefit to the clients who come here. So
No,
yeah,
yeah.
even though I've done run groups at standalone companies before, I wouldn't do that again. And if I didn't have Triple Ring, I'd look to work with a company like this.
You bring up some great points because, I think when you're an early stage company, depending on the talent you can attract, you're attracting them based on option grants, right? Or options at some level. You're not going to make the same, pay what at a Geithner, Stryker, or what when Geithner was around, but Stryker, J&J, for example. And so when you think about it from an investment standpoint, an investor looking at it, depending on what the CEO can bring on into the team from a technical standpoint, I would argue that if you bring it in-house early on, there's a lot of potential for blind spots because you're only as good as a group of people sitting around the table, whether you have clinical expertise, engineering expertise, that person who's leading the engineering efforts, their worldview and their breadth of experience, whatever it may be. It can really lend itself to some problems downstream when you make some key decisions in the product and customer requirements and what you think the requirements are in the field. And I've seen where, man, you get that wrong, you end up burning through a lot of money,
Yep.
and then you have to go back to investors and ask for another tranche, which is never a good conversation. And, working with you guys, you've been around the block many times of many different projects. And it would seem to me that you could really avoid a lot of those pitfalls.
Yeah. Uh, I can touch on a couple of points you hit there. I I believe building a team is the most challenging thing you take on within a startup. Um, Perhaps the only thing more challenging is raising the money. um, but building the team, um, it always takes a while for people to mesh, figure out how to work with each other. No one does a perfect job hiring. You're always going to deal with people who maybe don't work out. Um, in our model, you get to tap into people who have a track record of working together and working with each other. So there's some level of team cohesion already in place. You can also tap into only the resources you need when you need it. And uh, you may think some technology is primarily a mechanical engineering problem, and so you want to hire a bunch of mechanical engineers, and then somewhere along the way you um, discover, oh, if I apply this algorithm and signal processing, I can get rid of all that mechanical design, but now I need a couple electrical engineers. But if
Hmm.
you're in a startup and you've hired those mechanical engineers, now you're carrying that skill set. And what do you do with those folks? In our model, you can move people around, and tap into resources on a variable cost basis. And so it's more flexible. It lets you be more adaptable.
And how would you say, in your experience, investors react to a contract manufacturer versus someone who's brought it in-house as an early stage company?
Well, that's an interesting question. I'd say, we started the company in 2005, and the first few years we were running, I'd say there's a lot of pushback um, um, to having work done on the outside. And in fact, I remember one of our early customers where I ended up effectively being their VP of engineering, and I had to split my time between Triple Ring's payroll and their payroll for a while in a really creative structure just to address those sorts of concerns. Um, but that mindset really shifted uh, after the last recession. So 2008 to 2010 um, saw that shift. And I think investors started to realize that there was a real benefit to this virtual model where you aren't carrying all these folks, you aren't taking on all the expense of a building and labs and infrastructure if you don't need it, and you can be more nimble and agile. So um, we saw things shift at that point. I think um, some of the investors we deal with really started to recognize the value of this model. Not I think recognizing that started with the variable cost basis and the financial flexibility. Um, but then even beyond that, they saw the value of tapping into a team that's done a variety of projects, and can bring additional talents and skill sets. And then now as we've grown to the point we're at now, where we even have some investor partners alongside us, I think some of the investors we deal with see us as real collaborators, where we can help their companies with our network and introduce them to our investors we know, leverage our contacts for their benefit.
Right. Makes sense. Let me pivot a little bit here and kind of move away from triple rings and kind of go into you as the person. You got a very impressive track record, certainly the highest end pedigree from an educational standpoint. You're highly driven and motivated. So share with the audience who that person or persons are that's had the greatest influence on your personal and professional development.
Oh, the person who probably had the most impact on my professional development and a lot of impact on my personal development was a guy named Bruce Hasegawa, who was my PhD thesis advisor at Berkeley and UCSF. Yeah, Bruce was a wonderful guy. He had a really down to earth, very collaborative by nature, very friendly personality. And when I was working in his lab, he ran it in a very collegial, non-hierarchical way. And I still remember most days we had a big communal conference table where we ate lunch as a group. And he treated everyone equally, whether they were a research scientist or a postdoc or a first year grad student or even an undergrad visiting the lab. And I think his management style and mindset and way of treating people rubbed off on me, and it's been a big influence. And in fact, a couple of the key people here at Triple Ring came out of the same lab. So I think he influenced not just me, but a couple of our colleagues. He, he was also he was very generous with his time. Willing to um, invest in people, willing to help people, um, and without needing to know that something was going to come back to him in return. And I think that uh, that generosity of spirit is something that I, I aspire to, but
Sure.
he was exceptional at it.
Yeah, those are all great characteristics in running an organization. I mean, there's a lot of organizations that are Machiavellian to the core, right? And they put on a nice gloss of what they want to appear to be, but underneath it all is a little different. And that's really compliments to you and how you've structured Triple Rings. Because I know in my experience, that's what's bled through my experience with the people in your organization. They're just very approachable, very easy to work with and talk to, and ideize with, which is really important as you're thinking about who's going to help you get this project over the finish line. So if you can go back and think about in your past, and we're talking now to students that are just entering college or maybe leaving college. What are two, I guess, one or two career recipes for success that you could offer people coming into college or about to exit college, based on your experience that they should think about?
Yeah, I'd say one is don't be afraid to go ask people for help. Um, I've this is one I learned from Bruce. It's like um, I, I've always been surprised at just how willing people are to help you if you ask. Not always, but more often than not. And I I think if you're willing to ask people for help, then it saves you from always having to reinvent the wheel. So you don't have to do the stuff that's already been done. You can focus on doing the new creative stuff and find the new things. And I think that's very helpful uh, when you're first starting out. So don't be afraid to put yourself out there. Um, Another piece of advice that I got from one of my co-founders, Ed Solomon, but going back to well before we founded the company together with some of our other colleagues, he pointed out that in any position you're in, you should never stop selling. You're just always selling, and you should be aware of that. So if you're in a startup and you happen to meet an investor, you inevitably know more about that startup's technology and product than that investor does. So even if you aren't explicitly there to pitch the company, you want to be able to present what you're doing and explain it and tell that person what's good about it. Similarly, when you're doing work and presenting that work to your colleagues, you're really selling that work, but you're also selling yourself as a
Right.
collaborator, as a colleague. So be aware of how you present yourself. Uh, think about what you want them to take away from that interaction. It's a really useful skill set. And then the last thing is maybe one I picked up in a really random place, but a UC Santa Cruz extension course on creativity. And I remember it was taught by a woman who had been a faculty member, I think, in neuroscience at Princeton, but then was thinking of becoming a musician and ended out in California and was trying to chart her way through that. And she always believed that the best way to get what you want was to put it out there. So it works for anything. Like if you're, and this was in the days before everyone could just go Google everything. But if you're looking for a good, solid used car, you know, if you find yourself at a party, just mention to someone you're looking for a good, solid used car. If you happen to have a startup that uh, you think might be fundable someday, don't be afraid to tell someone, yeah, someday I want to form a startup and I have a couple ideas I'm working on. And I think it's that willingness to put yourself out there. You know, people can't read your mind. They're not going to be able to poke inside your brain and figure out what your hopes and dreams and aspirations are. It's useful to be able to talk about it, and people will be surprisingly willing to help you once they know what it is you have in mind.
Yeah, those are great recipes. I really like the part on the way I sort of relate to it is the whole branding. Like every day, every second of the day, we're pushing a brand, our own personal brand, and how people experience that. And boy, it's what you say is so, so true because you can meet a person and have that initial experience and maybe get a totally wrong reading of what that person's really about just because how they showed up, how they expressed themselves. And to be mindful of that, I think is really, really important. And to be humble to say, look, I don't know what I don't know. I need to check my ego. I got to check what I think I know and recognize we got two ears and one mouth, right, for a reason. And
Yeah,
I think at core, people really want to help. I think very successful professionals like yourself at core like to share what they've learned along the way. And you want to be helpful. And I think it's important, to, for people to recognize that.
yeah, yeah. It's funny as engineers and scientists. I think if you say you're doing selling or you're in sales, it's a bit of an anathema to the technical people, at least younger, when you're earlier in your career. But really, yeah, it's funny. I've really come to like the sales part of the business because I really don't see it as um, foisting something on people that they don't want. I just see it as part of a communication process to try to see if two people can help each other out.
Yeah, without sales, an engineering idea is a great paperweight. I mean, ultimately,
Right. Yep.
somebody to articulate and feature benefit and really help the customer understand the vision and how it can improve patient care and outcomes. So, if you can go back in time, Joe, and maybe your 15-year-old self, what advice would you give that 15-year-old self?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know if I had anticipated that question. In some ways, I'm pretty happy with what I'm doing now and satisfied with the path, but I would probably tell myself to take a little more time off. um, or realize that the time off is often as productive as the time spent grinding away, because you need that time to clear your head. Uh, that's probably a lesson I'm still giving to my 50-year-old self. So,
It's hard. It's hard. I mean, really,
yeah,
you're really trying to balance a lot of demands. You got to get a lot of things done. You got a family, a wife, and your personal life, and now you're trying to manage a business through COVID. So, but I agree. I think that downtime really renews your mind and perspective, and probably is your best problem solving time.
yeah. I think the other, maybe the other piece of advice, it, it's interesting. I think the management style here and um, the approach we take that's very collegial. I, that approach has always been somewhat intuitive to me, and but inevitably, early in my career, I would run into people who would view it as soft, and they would inevitably push a more hierarchical command and control approach to things as the right way. And um, I guess I would, maybe this isn't may I tell my 15-year-old self or my 22-year-old self, you know, being, nice and collegial and fair isn't being soft and mushy. There's inherent value in it. And
Yeah.
um, don't be afraid to be that way and espouse it.
And I think it's important because I think there's a lot of organizations that are very hierarchical, caste systems. You got the power structure, and people at the lower levels would like to share maybe a process improvement or something that can be done differently, but are fearful or afraid to speak into a situation because maybe the boss doesn't want to hear it for whatever reason. I remember I was with a company, Milliken and Company, who won the 1989 Malcolm Baldrige Award, National Quality Award, and they had this thing called OFIs, or opportunities for improvement, and they would celebrate people at the lowest levels of the organization that found processes that need to be improved, and they tied dollars to it. And I think celebrating that is
Mm.
really important because I've seen other cultures that are less so that way. And what you're espousing is if you have that collegial environment where people feel safe to say, hey, I have this idea, or I think we should think about this without fear of criticism or whatever, I think that's very helpful.
Yeah, yeah. No, I like the flat collegial organizations. Sometimes I err on the side of too flat, but it's um, yeah. I have a 16-year-old daughter, and I've talked to her a number of times about the fact that people um, sometimes like being led, but they rarely like being pushed. And
Right.
that difference between leading and pushing is really important. And it's um, once you figure that out, it's obvious in retrospect. But when you're younger and you thinking about moving up in organizations and managing, I, it's not taught to you.
Right. True. That's really well said. I like how you position that. That's something certainly important to reflect on: lead versus push. I think a lot of people bristle at being pushed, but leading, and when you see a leader, you know it when you see it. So, is there anything that you'd like to tell the audience that we haven't covered?
Hmm. That is a good question. I guess I would say that if the shelter in place ever ends, we love hosting people here at Triple Ring, and if there are some of these people who are younger in their career who are just looking to get a taste of what engineering and R&D is like. If we can open the building up, we love giving tours. If you just want to reach out and ask questions, and um, we try to answer. And if for some reason we missed you the first time, don't be afraid to be a little persistent.
Well, that's a great offer, and I hope people take you up on that because what an opportunity. So, where can they learn more about Triple Ring Technologies?
Well, you can certainly go to our website, so tripleringtech.com. Um, if we resume our in-person work, we've historically done a monthly seminar called MedTech Frontiers. You can look that up on the web. Lots of interesting talks where we try to bring people in from the community and um, uh, give people a chance to share knowledge about medtech and life science topics of interest.
That's exciting. Joe, really enjoyed the conversation. Really excited about the work you're doing at Triple Ring and sharing a different model, and hopefully for CEOs that are out there looking for money or contract manufacturing or how to develop that mousetrap, shall we say. I hope they really take the time to get to know the organization, and certainly when available, go up there and tour the facility, because that to me is what really tipped it for me when I went up there, saw the resources you had, the myriad of projects you're working on, the talent within Triple Ring. It's all very impressive.
Well, thanks. I really appreciate you uh, taking an interest in what we're doing and taking the time. And I'll put in a plug and say, Ben, you have some great ideas you're working on too. And always happy to share a conversation with another entrepreneur.
Yeah, likewise. Thank Joe. I really appreciate it and really enjoyed the conversation.
Okay, take care, Ben.